Sorry, little technical problem here. Windows decided to update while we were starting up, so everything's a bit behind. Can you hear me? Yes. I wrote this little publication a few years ago. You can find it online for free if you're interested, containing words that are not used properly in EU documents. I unashamedly make use of a presentation because I deal basically with incomprehensible language. And like watching a foreign language on television, it's always very useful if you have the subtitles as well. Now, I have a question. I usually do this rather interactively, but there's no time. I've got Guy here already waving his finger. If there should be any Dutch people present, do not answer this question. What is this a picture of? This big one there that doesn't look like a cow to me. Cattle. The reason I exclude Dutch people, because the Dutch word for cattle means, I'm told by Dutch people, means livestock in general. Whereas in English it just refers to animals of the genus Bos. Now, in the European Union, these are not cattle. They are bovine animals. And if you read any of the regulations and the directives, in about 60 to 70% of the cases, they're referred to as bovine animals. Sometimes they're referred to as cattle. And you might, none of you are farmers, but if you were reading the regulations and trying to work out the difference, there is none. In addition to bovine animals, we have ovine animals, which in most of the regulations of the European Union go together, because the regulations are nearly always together with these, which is a caprine animal. And we have equine animals as well, which are okay, because equine is a word that people actually know. We also have asinine animals, which I love. Like bovine, asinine is usually used to refer to people in English. So we have a series, but there are porcine animals as well, etc., etc. Does anybody know what this is? It's Larry the Cat from his Facebook page. And the much maligned Larry the Cat, who was accused yesterday of not actually doing his job, that in his mouth is a porcine animal? I don't know. A mouse. This is really him. It's just not just a random cat. I got it from Google Images, actually, which is one of my main resources. It really is. It's a good way of seeing whether a word actually means what people are using it for. Because if you look up, for example, enterprise, which in the EU is the normal word used to describe a business, you get pictures of spaceships. If you look up entity, which is the normal European Union word for a body or an institution, you get pictures of aliens. It's not proof, it's just an indication. Okay, we have a number of words from the agricultural field. Agriculture is very important for the European Union because a lot of EU money is spent on agriculture. I've just jotted a few words down there which are used in funny ways. The first, I would just mention the first one, which is modulation, which means reduction. Don't ask me. Don't know, but that's the way it is. Okay, this is something I copied from the Huffington Post. So I thought it was quite a nice little account. A young lady who worked for the Commission gave this description. The European Commission goes one step beyond the acronyms, abbreviations, and general jargon that pollute the language of every large administrative body. It's not a question of bad English, or not just bad English, but of Commission English. The first few weeks here are like watching an episode of the Teletubbies. Remember the Teletubbies? Yeah. Everyone appears to be using English words, or words that sound like English, but strung together they produce nothing of real meaning. One of my first meetings sounds like this. Heyo everyone. For the planification it is decided. Irene will organise externalising the briefs. Gert will link to some good actors. And Susanna, can you prepare the fish? Once I'd understood that I hadn't inadvertently been recruited to the commission canteen, but instead asked to prepare a fiche, French for document, and familiarised myself with the other bizarre misuses of English and blatant fabrications, I started to wonder whether this isn't all in fact part of some conspiracy. Susanna Savage is no longer working for the commission. Key words in my rather brief talk today, I'm afraid. I'm not used to being brief. Sorry, wrong button. Lingua franca, a language that is adopted as a common language between speakers whose native languages are different. I won't go into the history of this term and the fact that it doesn't really have a plural, which is also strange. But anyway, Double Dutch. A Dutchman was asking me yesterday, what is Double Dutch? So I looked it up, unintelligible language. Gibberish, my original title was Gibberish and Gobbledygook. Unintelligible or meaningless language, a technical or esoteric language, pretentious or needlessly obscure language. And gobbledygook, wordy and generally unintelligible jargon. That's Merriam-Webster, I think, the definition, which is the dictionary I use most. There are two theories on what is going to happen to English in the EU, or where the English in the EU is currently at, actually. One is the, let's say, the academic establishment, here exemplified by Marco Modiano, who's a Swedish academic, applied linguist. In a post-Brexit world, the conditions will be set for the emergence of a recognizable variety of Euro-English within the European Union. In the act of recognizing the validity of Euro-English, one liberates, rather strangely expressed here, one liberates continental European L2 users, second language users, of English from the tyranny of standard language ideology. This is accepted academic opinion, and this is what one is supposed to think. Then there's Double Dutch. This comes from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. There is absolutely no justification for writing this Double Dutch. Speaking it is okay. After all, the German expression was in Schriftform gegossene Kauderwelsch, for any German speakers there. I'm not a very good translator. I couldn't find a better expression. After all, one effective way of learning a foreign language is by speaking. We have to take it on board that we will make mistakes, but preferably not in front of 1 million people. The other one comes from an online blog. We are talking about Brussels here, where everything reads like gibberish and gobbledygook, even when it's written in your native tongue to begin with. This is very harsh, and it's not 100% true. But I just wanted to present the two contrasting points of view. The title of this article is EU Moves to Establish Gibberish as Lingua Franca. It was actually about machine translation, this article, but I won't go into that either. Okay. Occasionally you will see the word 4C dotted around this document. Ignore it for the time being. It was from a previous version. I used to play a game, Where's Wally? Where people had to find the word 4C used wrongly in text, because it's the most commonly misused word in EU English. It's used to mean various things. No time. But not 4C. Okay, I'm going to look at aspects of EU English, language policy in the EU, misused words, which is my main topic of study, and EU English and Brexit. And I'm going to hurry so I can get to that last one, which is the most interesting one. Why can EU English be difficult to understand? One, they use words, make words up, use words with different meanings from their normal English meanings. Two, word order is very often up the spout. You probably know English. One of the characteristics of the English language, unlike many other languages, is it has a very strict word order, and meaning is related to the word order, and readability is related to the word order. Punctuation, awful. I'm talking always here about published documents. I'm not talking about in-house stuff. Sentence length, diabolical. The nominal style, I'll describe what that means subsequently if and when I get the time, and there's 4C written in the middle again. I didn't actually know how to take it out, but prepositions, wrong very often. Prepositions are very important in English because we don't have cases. And verbs are used wrongly. So that's quite a wide panorama of things that language is made up of. Just picked this up from the newspaper yesterday, day before yesterday. Commission agents searched offices of Fox Networks Group in Hammersmith. I think if you see the word agents there, you'll think they're some sort of police, secret service or something. They were just normal European officials because the word agent in the EU means that you're an employee. But the Daily Mail, or Daily Express, sorry, this one, was able to use it to make it sound like something sinister was going on. Can EU actors keep using common law after Brexit? Now, why should actors be wanting to use common law? I read there was another article which, of course, I lost about I can't remember whether it was Egypt or Gaddafi or somebody being supported by international actors, and I imagine Johnny Depp or John Wayne going down. And in fact, an actor is just somebody who does something. They act. They do. Okay. I just run through this very quickly. Sentence length, word order and pronunciation. Sentence length. Various pieces of advice on how long a sentence can be in English, meaningless. It depends who you are and how well you write. But Thompson Rivers University says very few writers have the talent required to write a readable sentence of more than 20 or 30 words. And I think that is fairly good. Indeed, regardless of the fact that the Commission reports that employment aid is criticised by experts in terms of its effectiveness, because they consider that jobs targeted by the aid would have been created even in the absence of the subsidy, or because of the intrinsic high risk of substitution effect or displacement, and serious problems in the monitoring of the requirements, the Commission suggested that these types of aid aiming at youth employment could be maintained as a short-term measure without requiring the Member State to take appropriate measures to mitigate the above-mentioned risk. This was written by a friend of mine who gave me permission to use it, and she and her other Italian colleagues said this in Italian is a perfectly normal sentence. I have absolutely no reason to doubt that. Punctuation. The Member States which had decided to integrate the amounts available for coupled support into the SPS on the basis of the support received by farmers in the reference period had to retrieve for each scheme and for each farm the individual reference data. As pointed out above, Member States had significant discretion in establishing the criteria for the distribution of the amounts of coupled support that were available for integration into the SPS, but the criteria had to be objective and non-discriminatory and had to take in particular account of the support which the farmers had directly or indirectly received. Thank you, Sven. That was good. I've corrected that. I won't do that. That's the same sentence, same sentences in something that you can follow. It's not good, particularly good English, but you can actually understand what's going on. Understand Yoda we do, talk like Yoda we do not. I'm talking about word order here. Again, I haven't got time to go into this in details, but it's mostly about adverbial phrases being put in the wrong place. Sometimes with commas, which helps, and sometimes without. Both evaluations use, together with econometric estimates, GCE simulations. Any of you could correct that sentence quite easily, I suspect. These minimum price levels in many cases are higher than the world price level for the same products. What they're doing is they're sticking an adverbial phrase in the middle where English would put it in the end, or possibly at the beginning with a comma. Prepositions, very quickly. frequent use of wrong preposition, in particular the excessive use of. EU English uses of, I don't know, I'm making it up, all my statistics are made up, 5 times the number of cases of in an EU document as you will find in a document written by a native speaker. Used in place of, by, from, it, in, at, and for, and other prepositions as well. And the use of an of construction, the book of John instead of John's book, instead of noun compounds or possessive forms. And you also get extra prepositions stuck in there, which are not required. Just have a couple of examples of that. Communication of the Commission instead of letter from the Commission. EC reports of the projects instead of Commission reports on the projects. Increase of the value instead of increase in the value. And these are just examples chosen at random because you can find of used in the place of pretty well every preposition that you know. I'll go on. Verbs. Tenses tend to slide forward towards the present. Sequence of tenses is not complied with, adhered to in English as much as it was when I was at school, but they tend to move past tenses towards the present. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Another curious thing is the use of shall instead of should and will, or just the simple present. That is very odd. It comes from a legalistic use of shall that nobody is particularly well understand. Now, again, I'll show you some examples. A number of transitive verbs used intransitively. This allows to do something rather than this allows us to do something, etc. And this is a very, very consistent thing across the board with a limited number of verbs. So, in Austria, the court found an investment project of a bottling plant, rather than, a bottling plant that is currently in liquidation. Sorry, I'm back on tenses again. I got lost because the preposition wrong there. Instead of was. Has been becomes was again. And, oh, thank goodness for that. I was worried. the example of, which is why I don't use Windows. The example of shall I have here, as regards the Spanish sample, the subregions are not one of the dimensions of the coverage. In fact, the FADN data shall be representative of the FADN division. Must, or should. It shall be noted that the Commission takes into account the Court's observations during its own audits. It shall be noted. It should be noted. The nominal style, sorry, running out of time. One example here. Tend to use a construction with a noun instead of a verb. French loves that. Some languages love that. English abhors it. The services cannot proceed to the authorization of payments in your favor. It's in that document you have there. The services cannot authorize payments in your favor. And this is, across the board, a continual problem. Okay, EU language policy, part 2. The EU has 24 official and working languages. When you hear that English is the working language of the Commission or French is the working languages of Europe or whatever, this is not true. The 24 languages have equal status. And the number is rising. We're expecting, or I'm expecting, Albanian, Macedonian, Serbian, not Turkish. There are some new constructs called SCB and BCS and BCMS, which I came across recently, which is a realization that various former Yugoslavian countries actually speak the same language. You need only 2 working languages to work at the EU, and neither, you can do that without either of them being English or French. In practice, however, for nearly 40 years, interactions and originals of publications were mostly in French. Since the late 1990s, French was replaced by English. And current figures from DG Translation, which do not actually, you can't actually get at them, I was given this by the person responsible, or as we say in the EU, the responsible person. From DG Translation, 81% of documents, this was a couple of years ago, are actually now drafted in English. Only 5% in French, 2% in German, and 12% in other languages. So dominance of English there is quite clear, I think. Most spoken interactions occur in English, particularly in meetings. Again, I have no statistics for that. There are no statistics for that. What English do we use in the EU? Silly question. No, it isn't. One thing that most people don't think of is that published EU texts are largely intended for native speakers. This is because everything is part of the EU ideology, that everything should be available for people in their own languages. Therefore, everything is translated, so there should, in theory, be no reason why a Pole should be reading the English version. Actually, they do. The Italians I audited, the Italian authorities that I audited, always referred to the English version as the EU version and gave it somehow a higher value than their own Italian version. This is legal nonsense, but that's what's in people's heads. Official policy is to use standard British and Irish English. Now, I am responsible for sticking Irish in there. I didn't actually say I saw Brexit coming, but it was originally in our style guide, it said British English. And I said, well, I think we ought to put Irish English there as well, and that is now in the official EU style guide. Nobody noticed, and I don't think they'll be taking it out in a hurry. Commission style guide talks about the standard usage of Britain and Ireland. And the interinstitutional style guide, which I partly authored, not a very good document, but anyway, my fault, puts forward classics like Fowler and the OED and you know, all the old things that you would use in the United Kingdom that newspapers might refer to as the model for our English. Okay, I just want to get back to some misused words because that's, as I say, where the fun is. Love the word planification. That's a war room, I think. It means planning. Comitology, don't ask me about the meatballs. I wanted a picture of comitology. I looked it up in Google Images, and it gave me meatballs. Comitology just means a procedure whereby things are decided by committees. Wrong spelling, wrong suffix, but that's what it is. Fiche is a document. Those are the invented words. In-house jargon, forgive the pictures, there's no political intention there. An axis is a policy priority or a big road. The plural axes may be confused with axes. And these are, in particular, Anglo-Saxon axes, who, of course, will no longer be in the European Union shortly. To transpose, that's a little geometry exercise, I think, in the European Union means to incorporate in national law, not an English word. Other sector, business and finance, there's the financial envelope, which is not a bribe but a budget. Enterprise, as I said before, which is not a spaceship but the normal default word for a business. You know, I have a little enterprise in Norwich, or I will have shortly. An economic operator is a businessman. Somebody has a company. As you see from Google Images, you have to be young and pretty and have something in your ear to be an operator in English. A trimester is any 4 monthly, I nearly said 3 monthly, 4 monthly period. Heavy means lots of red tape. Suppress means to eliminate. You suppress a form, you suppress a task or whatever. It goes along with, what's the other one? I can't think of it. There's another one, which the word's okay, but its connotations are completely wrong from the way it's used. Homogenize, I won't go into. Transmit is the normal word for to send. You transmit a document. In English, you transmit either with Morse code, as the case here, or I'm not really sure, on the radio, I suppose, or on the television. If you're sending a paper or a document to the mission, you transmit it, and if they forward it on, They retransmit it. I'm being told I'm talking wrong. We have agents who are just staff members. We have a legislator, which is not a lawmaker, but an institution. A mission, which is a business trip. A college, which, like the College of Cardinals in English, is actually used to refer to the commission, deciding as a group. Prescription, which is used to mean time bar on a legal time bar, and an entity, which, as we saw was a body. Vocabulary meets grammar. I will have to skip that, I'm afraid, because I'm running over. And those were the tables of the law. It ties into the rabbi business. And there's another category which I call particularly annoying: foresee and control. Foresee is a bit complicated, no time. Control means to check in the EU. So the Commission agents who come to control expenditure in the member states are just staff checking the books, which is what my former employer used to do. Okay, EU English and Brexit. Brexit. I personally consider the EU's incapacity to communicate clearly, not only with the United Kingdom, but because English refers to a particular, has a particular status, and the English is particularly unusual because it is habitually written by non-native speakers, whereas the other languages in the EU are habitually written and corrected by experts. Experts because they are linguists, and experts because they are native speakers of the language. They tell me that actually they're Romanian, Bulgarian, or whatever. They're not allowed to write proper Romanian, Bulgarian, but it's not the same entity of the problem. So I think a contributive factor to Brexit may have been the sense that this is a distant body talking double Dutch that doesn't want to communicate with us, which is not at all the case. It's just the way things work. And I have a couple of quotes here. Ordinary readers regard the EU text as obscure and vague. This is from Jonathan Sunger, chief architect of Google, talking about my publication. I have no idea what the chief architect of Google does and who he is, but it sounds good, doesn't it? This list is weirdly fascinating. It explains a lot about why EU documents read like some kind of Kafkaesque nightmare where you're being commanded to do things that don't quite make sense. One in French, which I'll skip. English after Brexit. Will English cease to be an official language after Brexit? And there's a load of stuff there from Danuta Hübner, however you pronounce that in Danish, I don't know, who's put forward a thing widely published whereby English will be eliminated as an official language, and the reason being that it has only been notified, registered by England and not by Ireland or Malta, and the other thing is that all UK staff will be sacked. I don't agree with that. However, UK staff numbers were already falling before Brexit. 50% fall between 2004 and 2014. It had become impossible, almost impossible, to recruit British people, which I can explain but have no time here. And you need an EU nationality required for a job at the EU, so the assumption is British people will no longer be employable. I think nobody's likely to be sacked, but it is probable that no more British people will be taken on because we don't fulfil the minimum requirements. I believe also that this will affect the nature of the English used because there will be no native. A common procedure in the EU institutions is that you get your British mate to have a look at your document. There will be no British mates left. There will only be Irish mates, and the Irish mates are rather few and far between by dint of the size of the country. The nature of the English used. We currently basically work on the UK model with Irish tagged on because I put it in there, but I'm also assuming that Irish and British English are fundamentally the same. Will there be a justification for maintaining a UK model and looking at foulers when you want to see if something's right, when the UK is not in the EU? Why don't we just use a US or international model, whatever international model means? I can see no justification for not doing so. A lot of our new recruits come in speaking an Americanized English. Why should we insist on spelling colour with a U? Why not we let them spell it without a U? Or a European model, as proposed by the chap I quoted earlier, which in my view would be impractical and total chaos, because I don't think one exists or can exist in the near future. Why will English remain the main language of the European institutions? I think that map shows it. The only figures available are for 2012. As you know, actually, the situation has changed in favour of English radically since 2012. There are no newer figures. English is not only the first language of one country on its way out, and let's say, the real first language of one small country which is staying in, but it is the second language of nearly every other country in the European Union. It is what people learn, it is what people want to learn. And I think that will not be less the case in the future. I think it will be more, and that is not because of the power of the UK, it is because of the power of the English language. More maps available on that website down there if you're interested. Okay. The other reason is that regulation number 1 actually states that English is an official language of the European Union, and it would need the assent of the Irish government to get rid of it. And I think any Irishman present would tell you that the Irish government will not give that assent. And the Maltese government, but that's a slightly different question. The form I gave you, unfortunately, I haven't got time to deal with in detail. The piece of paper, sorry, slow down. I recently had open heart surgery, and 6 months ago. If anybody needs it, I can recommend a very good surgeon in London. This guy was sent this form, but by our what do you call it in English? We call it in EU, we call it sickness insurance. It's what we call in English health insurance. Don't know how that works. Our EU health insurance, they sent him this form to fill in, and yes, reasonable form, name, surname, name first, sorry, yeah. There's a funny thing about names as well. Name means, in EU English, means surname. Doesn't mean your whole name, etc., etc. Simple form, but they also annexed the paper you have in your hands. Please read these important instructions before filling in the documents. The PDF forms, which you will find hereafter, are intended to help you in communicating to the Commission departments. Who would request you to forward your legal and, if necessary, banking coordinates, so that those can be recorded in the legal entity file and or in the bank account file, managed both by the accounting officer of the Commission and... managed both by the accounting officer of the Commission. Under the terms of the regulatory provisions mentioned hereafter, the services with which you intend to sign a financing convention or a contract and or which will allocate funds to you cannot launch awarding procedures for a contract or a subvention, nor can they proceed to the authorization of payments in your favour as long as your coordinates are not recorded and centrally validated. I think people working in the EU would generally understand this. I think so. The reaction of the people I was dealing with medically was, can you just pay me? They found this incredibly hostile, incomprehensible, and were worried about page 2, where the regulatory provisions are detailed. And the regulatory provisions explains the legal situation, and they were worried, I was told, that they would get into trouble because they hadn't understood the first page. I summarise this, and this is what that page actually says. Please fill in these forms. The first tells us who you are. There are 3 different versions, depending on whether you're a public body, a private company, or an individual. Please only fill in the one that applies to you. The second is for your bank details. It is the same for everybody. We need this information so that we can pay you, so it needs to be accurate. If you wish to tell us about more than one bank account, please fill in one form per account. Now, I thought about it, and I thought about what it really means is this. Okay.